Okay, we have just a little short of half an hour for questions. Just a few rules to questions. When posing the question, please state your name and your organisation and try and keep them short. Although we're very happy to also have comments and reflections and criticisms, whatever you feel necessary. And also we'll be taking questions from the online audience. So who wants to go first? Yes, in the mic.
Thank you very much. I'm Hirut Zamana from Embassy of Ethiopia. I'm a trade, investment and tourism counsellor. It was a great honor for me to be here to listen to this fantastic research and outcomes and to listen to people who have been on the ground in East Africa. I have one question and one short comment. My question is that the topics were about adaptation and resilience, and I was wondering how the group saw Ethiopia's new green resilient strategy, which was planning by 2025 to have a zero emission policy or objective. The other one is I just don't want to be focusing too much on Ethiopia, but even in general, when we talk about East Africa, I was wondering how we would bring the balance when we raise single subjects on countries. For example, I heard John Vidal talking about ripping apart communities in some part of the country, but we should put things into perspective, because I think he has traveled a lot to Ethiopia and to other parts of Africa. How about tree planting in Ethiopia, which was an initiative in 2000 Ethiopian calendar, which is 7 years behind the European calendar. It was a local initiative, and people each person was encouraged to plant 2 trees, and this helped develop the revival of nature in some parts of drought-prone countries, and put into perspective where there is a 1.1 million kilometer square country with 80 million population, and we're talking about, I don't want to go into that, but the land grab issue where small area of land out of 1.1 million hectares of land, only 3 million is allocated in the land bank and given to investors. Just to put into perspective, just want to say 2 points. Thank you very much.
Thank you. With other questions? Yes, one in the back there.
My name is Paul Robson. I'm an independent consultant. I've been working with the Ministry of the Environment in Angola. But I have a comment on Simon Levine's observation at the end of his talk that none of this is new. In the 1980s, I worked on a rural development program in Mozambique, which at the time was considered quite innovative, and tried to address some of the questions that have been raised in these papers. Thank you very much. And yes, I think it's gone again. The question which came immediately to my mind when I read the papers was, yes, we were talking about this in the 1980s. Why are we still talking about it? At the time, what we were doing in Mozambique, although it was seen as innovative, it was seen as the way forward. FAO was involved, quite a large number of donors were involved, and there was a feeling in those circles that rural development should understand better the constraints of the people that it was supposed to serve, try and build their own capacity to do their own trials, their own experiments. But it seems to have all disappeared. And it seems to me that the key question is to analyse, well, why did it disappear? And are we simply going to say, well, it should have been different? My observation from working on a programme like that was that, for example, if you say you should put small-scale farmers in touch with agricultural research stations or seed breeders, and so that those bodies would know what the needs were of small-scale farmers, that's much easier said than done. There's a lot of resistance among research stations and seed breeding institutions to actually adapt. They themselves are starting from a particular point of view, which is usually dealing with larger scale farmers, and the demands and the constraints of small-scale farmers for the type of innovations or seeds that they are looking for is very different, and it's very difficult for them to make that jump. Another observation is that at the time that in the 1980s this was a government program, since then a lot of programs in these kind of countries have become NGO programs, and we have what has become called the tyranny of the log frame, the need to define short-term outputs, to define beforehand a kind of logical framework of, well, we're going to do this because this will produce this, with very little chance of questioning whether this first step actually leads to the larger step. So a question, I mean, who is actually looking at what are the barriers to this kind of work? What can we learn from what was done 25 and 30 years ago? Because it was started and then it just kind of stopped.
Good. Thank you very much. One more right at the front here, and then I'll take another batch of 3 after we've gone round one. Malcolm in here, chap in the yellow tie.
Thank you very much. Carl Schultz with the Higher Ground Foundation. We're trying to create a voluntary market and vulnerability reduction credits. The point has been raised on a number of occasions that, for instance, was a tree planting project, and then they called it climate change. I've done some work where basically pet projects are now just sort of relabeled because climate change is where the money is, where the attention is. But then the other issue was raised that there's, you can't completely separate all of these dynamics. So a question that might inform policy, if you could address, is how do you try to take the climate component and make that additional and address climate, but do it in a way that acknowledges the interplay between different inputs and outputs?
Okay, good, thank you. Let me just invite the panel then to respond to that first group. My request of the panel, though, is that you pick one of those questions to respond to, and you keep the response as short as possible. But Simon, there was one directed at you in particular that maybe you can start. From Paul asking, who's researching kind of why did things not work in the 1980s? What happened to kind of investments in innovation?
Yes, good question. I wish I knew the answer to that. Yeah, I mean, I think the problem is in the statement you said, well, there's resistance when you try and, for example, link farmers to research stations. Let's take that as just been any example of trying to make linkages and get a system to work of different actors. And you said, research stations start from their point of view, and that kind of doesn't fit with the smallholder farmers. That's the problem, is that they shouldn't have their point of view. They are there, if you like, as a system actor. As a whole, the whole of society needs agricultural development, it needs less vulnerable farmers, it needs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the research station should be set up to deliver, to be a cog in a machine which delivers that. And they shouldn't have their own agenda. Now, of course, everyone does. And this is in no way to blame them, because this is around system reward, system financing, and if you like, we're back to the tyranny of the log frame again, because they've got their own. And they shouldn't have their own log frame. If you like, if there's any log frame at all, it should be for the system with the farmers and so on, and all the different actors. Now, who is thinking and analysing these things at system level? That's the level at which we need far more research and work. And thinking. It's not kind of. I don't think we need thousands and thousands of empirical studies to kind of to quantify and create data. It's around analysing and thinking how to put systems right. If anyone knows who's doing that, I would love to be put in touch with them.
Okay, Kate, which one do you want to pick up?
I'm going to answer all three in one go.
Oh,
wow. Well,
I'm going to try. Double points for that.
But I'd just like to comment. I think it's very important, this thing about the lack of learning, and it's something that actually sort of, horrifies me in a way. And I agree with what Simon said, and I think that there are problems with the way in which institutions don't learn, and institutions continually reinvent and recycle the same things. But what I wanted to say, which I hope picks up on sort of each of those questions in a way, and actually responds to John's point really about good development and the idea that we just need to do development better in order to address these contemporary issues such as climate change, because actually I think we need to do things differently, and I think a lot of the problems as I see them with the current responses to climate change is that actually they're not rethinking how development happens, and they're not really taking account of the types of changes, because from my perspective, I really think we're in a new era of change. I think that the kind of, the types of changes, and particularly the rates of change, are unprecedented. I don't think we have the tools to deal with that, and I don't think that even good development as we understand it at the moment can cope with it. But I think, we've got a new science. I mean, actually science has really come on. So to answer the question about, since the 80s, we have a much better understanding of complexity and uncertainty. We have much greater connectivity. We've got much better ways of communicating with one another around the world. And, that in a way has led to new ethical issues. And I think we are, developing a sort of a new ethic because of that connectivity. But I think that there are these new relationships between people's livelihoods and, the sort of resources, the ecosystem services that they depend on, which are completely different. I mean, we've only got to look at the rate of urbanization in many parts of the world. I mean, you talked about East Africa. I was in Kenya before Christmas, and people are talking about urbanization as just, kind of sweeping kind of development strategies out of the way, and, having to rethink, national and subnational strategies. We've got a new world economy, and we've got completely new sort of power and economic sort of axes in the world. So actually, I think we need to rethink a bit more. We've got some tools, but actually we've got a long way to go.
Okay.
Can I?
Good.
Yeah.
John.
Well, I'd like to respond to that, but I'm sorry, Ethiopia. I love you. It's fantastic what Ethiopia is doing in so many areas. I mean, you have the right to get it wrong as well, and in some places. But the point I'm trying to make is that and it's not just Ethiopia. There are many other countries which are engaging in certain kinds of farming or land development or whatever, which are clearly not up to scrutiny. And I've seen it in Brazil, in India, in Indonesia, everywhere, and sort of from the ripping down of forests and the palm plantations and whatever, and the sort of feeding of the world market, sort of rather unthinkingly, and sort of the corporate. It doesn't sort of particularly help the climate debate, I don't think. But that's not the thing. I think, the tree planting in Ethiopia absolutely fantastic. I mean, if ever it was needed, it is there. So jolly good what you're doing. I think there's this thing about development, about needing a completely new. I think we have to go back to go forward in a funny way. I think there's, I'd be interested to know what kind of development we do need. If we can't, if the best isn't good enough, then what should we be doing? And what should countries be doing? Are we talking about geoengineering? Are we in some completely new sort of techno fix or something? What kind of stuff are you thinking of which isn't being addressed by the best development agencies now? So where, as an academic, are you seeing things which could be really picked up? Where are the best examples you would see of good development, good climate resilience being built into something? And I would say that the best stuff is perfectly good for the future. But anyway, I'd be fascinated to know.
Hold that thought for a moment. Joe, anything you'd like to say?
What was the question about the climate, the green economy? Just to check that.
So the point that you made about Ethiopia was that there's a plan for a kind of green growth, green economy strategy for Ethiopia, which is trying to reach kind of carbon neutrality by 2025, and Ethiopia has ambitions to become middle-income country. Because how does the work kind of fit into kind of that context?
From Accra's perspective, we work closely with the government of Ethiopia, and we've welcomed that, and we're looking at trying to get some additional funding from DFID to second some more experts into the government at national and regional level. But it's pretty, we're pretty sure we'll get it. I'm not trying to put pressure on DFID there. To second experts into one of the regional governments in Ethiopia and national government level to support the kind of strategic climate institutions. So we're very much, even though we're a relatively small setup, we're certainly looking to contribute to the government's strategic plans and support to improve and build those wherever possible.
Okay, thank you. Let me hold it there. I saw multiple hands here, but have you got the microphone? There's a lady in the back in the green jumper, and then Tim here in the front, and we'll see how we're going after that.
My name's Elsa Dawson. I'm an independent consultant working on development and gender equality. I'm being increasingly asked by agencies who are involved in ecological protection, both in terms of action and research, to help them bring in a gender perspective to their work. So I'd appreciate any ideas the panel have on what the most important gender issues are that I should be bringing to my clients' attention.
Okay, great. Tim.
I'm Tim Waits, I'm with DFID. My observation, I think, is that the first phase of ACRA was funded from a humanitarian budget, and the second phase is going to be funded from a development budget, our PPA. And for me, the really interesting thing about resilience is that it's trying to bring those two worlds together. And I think that what needs to be different in the future is how we're framing the problem. And I think that our programs need to have that sort of stretch, so they need to have that sort of long-term perspective, but inbuilt there needs to be that short-term disaster thing. That's what's new. The systems are breaking down, and so a development perspective needs to have a disaster management within it. I mean, either in one program or a number of programs working together. And I think that's the interesting new world that we're going to move into, and I think innovation is going to play a big part of that. And finally, just to say that ACRA was a well-performing project. I did the project completion report last Friday and hit targets. It's been a great bunch of people to work with. Thank you.
It's very nice to hear. Let me just pause our questions from the audience and take a couple from our online audience. We have one from Seamus Anderson from the Programme Effectiveness Unit at World Vision International. I think a question probably directed at those involved in ACRA. Can you highlight examples of where there is good practice in building local agency and innovation that we can look at and learn from? Maybe not putting any individual agencies on the spot here, but is there a kind of part of the programs that you looked at? And then also from Toby Quantrill and the Fair Trade Foundation, what's the difference in between the concepts of agency and that of empowerment? Is there any difference there? So we've got a kind of a grouping of 4 questions there. And, Simon, do you want to start? Pick one.
Right, okay. Well, I suppose I have to take the one on examples of good practice in local innovation. The one that springs, I don't want to say it's the only one, the one that springs immediately to mind was actually not an NGO one, but it was the government of Mozambique. And they were running this great thing. They have this, it's kind of a knowledge fair. And if you like, it's a kind of trade fair, science fair, if you like, but it's purely around local, village-level new innovations. So they get all the farmers. So you get, some farmers invented a new way of. I think it was one. They invented a new way of shelling groundnuts. You could do it in half the time, and it was basically sort of a bit of wood and something or other, and it worked. It was brilliant, and had lots of examples like that. And it was just facilitating this spread of ideas and so on. And then some of them were being picked up. And kind of, scientists will kind of refine it and manufacture it and promulgate it. So it was both kind of, if you like, farmer to farmer sharing, but much more than that. It was kind of bringing all the systems together, and that one was, and I thought that was absolutely great.
Okay,
I'll be very brief there.
Joe.
Yeah, on the innovation front. Well, I mean, to be honest, this was one of the key weaknesses we found. I mean, how do you support innovation whilst you're trying to reduce risk? It's very difficult to do, and I think one of the findings with ACRA was actually that one of the issues is the sort of attitude of our agencies in implementing. Here we are providing innovations to you as a community, and a bit of a blind spot was looking at, okay, what are you already doing? I mean, are you trying any new things? So there was an example of where there was some quite innovative water management work being done that was sort of not really focused on by the agency. Why are you doing that innovation? What is it that has enabled you to do that? Why are other people replicating it? So, I mean, one of the key recommendations for for our agencies from Accra is how can you pay attention to current innovations, ongoing, and how do we change that mindset about here we are, providing innovations to you, because actually communities do adapt and they do innovate themselves. So the answer is no, not really, but it provides a lot of learnings in terms of how we should work, and quite difficult questions about how you affect attitude change within the agencies.
Thank you. Kate.
Oh, thank you. I'd like to just quickly respond to Elsa Dawson's point, because I think that, certainly in understanding adaptive capacity, I think a sort of gendered perspective is absolutely vital, because, time and time again, I think the studies show that there's big differences, amongst, lots social differences in adaptive capacity, and very interesting findings. Certainly, the research that I know, mainly in Africa, in Uganda, in Tanzania, in Cameroon, which shows that there's such gendered differences with the way in which people can adapt to different types of change and shocks. And, for example, the role of social capital, that actually, women are able to draw on completely different forms of social capital, that security means very different things to men and women. And so I think, that's actually a really good area which, gender specialists can inform really richly. So I would, support that. And just also to say thank you to Tim, because I think that, that kind of analysis of how a resilience approach can help bring together those different, aspects of development, and sort of, so they're talking to each other in a strategy is really helpful.
Okay, John, anything to add to that?
Yeah, you go back to diversity and things like biodiversity is really important. And I remember Peru seeing a guy, I called him Mr. Potato, because he was actually, he'd developed more than 250 varieties of potato. And this is for his, out of interest apart from anything else, but also because he was finding that some were much more resilient to drought, resilient to heat, resilient to other stresses. And it's that thing where communities or individuals can be encouraged to diversify their economies and their knowledge, then I think you get resilience building up there. Also, I've just seen in Nepal people collecting rainwater, people collecting, very, very simple things are actually often the easiest and the best, but people forget them. How to insulate your housing when it's cold. A lot of people just don't know if it's suddenly getting these sort of enormous frosts or whatever. How actually do you keep warm? How do you keep your animals warm? How do you get your animals to warm you? How do you warm? It's just very, very simple educative stuff which we might take for granted. Actually, in communities which haven't had to think about these things before, needs to know. So it comes back to simple education. I think that's my trick.
Okay, I think we're going to have to close. I know there's lots of hands in the audience wanting to ask questions, and we have more from the online audience, but we do have an opportunity for people to stay around for the next half an hour. Please pose those questions of the panel. The panel will be staying. Thank you very much for all being part of, I think, a really rich session, lots of ideas, certainly lots for us to consider in all of our work. Just wanted to highlight, if you wanted to know more information about Accra, there is the Accra website on the screen. Easy to also find, kind of typing in Accra and climate change into Google, it comes up very easily. So you don't have to remember the longer website address. Look, it just remains for me to thank all members of the panel, who I'm sure you'll agree with me gave some really interesting perspective and points of learning today. So join me in a round of applause.